Bedina, thank you for your time today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It is my pleasure.
And it's my honor.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about your family, where you grew up in Cuba, when were you born, a little bit about your father, your parents.
Well, I was supposed to have been born in the province of Matanzas. That's where my father was stationed. As you know, my father was in the military. In fact, one thing that I always like to say, because people ask me, oh, was your father in Batista's army? And I always say, no, my father was in the Cuban Constitutional Armed Forces. My father was a career military, and he joined in 1937 when he was very young as an enlisted man, and then 2 years later he joined the academy, meaning officer school. Graduated in 1942, and then he was sent to another province, Camagüey, as a second lieutenant, and that's where I was made. But then he was transferred to Matanzas, and he was posted there. Anyhow, at the time when my mother was about to have me, which was in 1943, she decided to be near her family, so she ended up going to Havana, and that's where I was born. So I could have been born either in Matanzas, but I was born in Havana. Anyway, so that's where I was born. My dad is from Trinidad, and although my mom was actually from Havana, but her family is from Pinar del Rio. And earlier Roberto was talking about where tobacco comes from, and that's where my family did in Pinar del Rio. It's called Vuelta Abajo, and it was just a little town near in the end of Cuba called Las Martinas, and that's what they did. They grew tobacco, and so that's where the family is actually from. Anyway, back to your question, I was born in 1943, grew up in pretty much in Havana, because after a couple of years, my father was transferred. I believe it was 1946 and 47. He was transferred to Havana, and he was sent to Palacio, which, as you know, was the presidential palace where the president lived. And so he was part of the Guardia de Palacio of the guard there. I remember Palacio very well, because as a little girl, my dad used to take me there. So he served under President Grau. He served under Prio, and then obviously also as well under Batista. So we lived in Havana. My family lived in a neighborhood of Havana called La Víbora, and that's where they settled. I'm talking about dating back to the late 1800s. And so my family lived there all their lives. And in 1952, we moved to Colombia, which was the main military installation in Cuba, in Havana. And so I grew up, we moved there when I was 9 until I was 15, and they were some of the best years of my life. I met your sister Norma, obviously, and your sister Carmen. We became very good friends. We did a lot of things together. We rode bicycles along the Polígono, which was a kind of like a field surrounded by a sidewalk, and you could walk there, you could ride bicycles. We used to ride skates. As a matter of fact, your sister and I were pretty good skaters when we were kids, and we used to do what little girls do, what girls do or used to do in that age. We played cards. In fact, we used to spend hours as we got older playing canasta. So it was a real healthy, fun life that we had until January 1st, 1959.
Yes, I've heard about that. And
yes.
I've also heard the excuse of my sister saying that when I was a baby, I used to say poo-poo, and I had to be right around Colombia.
Oh, yes.
I think that was an excuse for them to see the good-looking soldiers. And you guys used that as an excuse.
Especially the military police.
Yeah, I know, but exactly. So you're using me as an excuse.
Yes.
But yes, talk to me a little bit about that shocking day? The date, everybody's talking about December 21st of 2012 ending, the world ending. The world doesn't end. The way of life, people's way of life. The world of the Cuban people, of our parents' generation or grandparents, truly ended January 1st, 1959. Your life, my sister's life, ended.
Over the years, I have looked back at my life, and I see my life as a series of episodes. I don't want to call them chapters because I think of a chapter of a book being too small. So I call them more like episodes, and these are eras in my life. And and you're absolutely right, that's where one of my episodes or my eras stopped. All I can tell you, and this is what I remember, several of us, your sister was not there because she was visiting family here in the United States with your mom and dad and sister. But several of us, young girls, we were all in 15, 16 years old. We met at the Officers Club. We turned on the jukebox and we started dancing. There were a few boys there and we danced until about maybe 12:30, 12:45. My father was there until about 11:30. And at 11:30 he told my mom that he had to leave because he had to do the traditional brindis or toast with the president. And that really was the last time I saw my dad until about 4 weeks later. But that's another story. That's another side of it. We went home, went to bed, and exactly about 3:30, my mother woke me up. And she said, "Get dressed, we have to go." I was asleep. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I said, "No, I'm sleepy." And she said, "You have to get up, get dressed, and we're going. And do it now." So she woke up my brother, who was 5 years younger than me. So in other words, he was 10 years old at the time. And a cousin of mine who was spending the night. So I got dressed, and I remember my mother picking up a few things from the house, not very many, and my father's driver, who really became a lifesaver for us in many ways after that. His name was Camejo, and Sergeant Camejo, and I will always, always be grateful to him for everything he did for us and for my dad as well. So he had already pulled in front of the house, and so my mother, my brother, my cousin, and I got in the car, and I remember leaving Colombia in the dark with the lights off in the car and driving through Havana. I had no idea what was going on, to my grandparents' home. With the lights off, my grandparents were waiting for us. We literally were ushered in. Camejo left with the car, and then I was finally able to ask my mom what's going on, and she said, "I'm not sure, but I think Batista left." So I remember being taken to one of the bedrooms in my grandparents' home, and I went to bed. My brother also was in bed with me, and I don't know where my cousin went, but anyway, he was there also. And the following morning, that's when we started finding out, that morning actually, everything that had happened. There were people going by in the streets yelling and screaming, shots being fired. And it was, for me, as a 15-year-old, it was I had no idea. I felt like I was suspended because I did not know what was going to happen, what was the outcome of all of this. And I even thought it was a temporary thing, that Batista perhaps had gone on vacation. When he said he left, I thought, well, maybe he went on vacation and people are going crazy. But it became very evident that things were not that simple, that something major had happened. As to what happened to my dad, he stayed, and the details, as I know them from him was that he was told by one of his colleagues.
Your dad's name, please.
Oh, my dad's name is Armando Echemendia Leiva.
Lieutenant Colonel.
No, Colonel.
Colonel.
Yeah, my dad was a full colonel in the infantry. My dad was a chief of one of the regiments in the infantry. So he was told by one of his colleagues, and I don't know if you want the name mentioned or not, and maybe I should not mention the name, but he was told by one of his colleagues to go while they were having the traditional toast with the president, that he should go to the regiment and stay there. And so that's what my dad did. He followed orders. That's what he was told, not by a colleague, I'm sorry, but from a superior. And that's what he did. So the following morning, but then he knew what was going on. So he called and put the entire regiment on I don't know what it called, on alert. I think that's what it's called. So all the soldiers and everybody, they were restricted to the base. They could not leave. But around, if I remember correctly, around 1 o'clock that afternoon, his assistant, a captain that he had mentored from the time this, and I will mention his name, Felix Lopez, okay? He came over with another captain, Artemio Arias. He was actually a major, Artemio Arias, and they literally put a gun to his head and told him to surrender the regiment because they were taking over. At that point, my dad thought they were kidding, and of course they were not kidding. So when my father went for his gun, they said, if you move, we'll kill you. And so they took my father's gun, and they took him to, and I don't know exactly how to translate directly from, it's called the calabozos.
That's why you say in Spanish.
You know, and which was an area where they kept some prisoners. And so he was sent there, and there were other officers there already at the calabozos. All officers, no enlisted men, only officers. So my mother had no idea what was going on. She didn't know where he was. They were, as you know, they were killing people right and left. I mean, people were being executed for no reason at all. Executions in the middle of the street. And we had no idea what had happened to my dad. So about a week later, about 4 days later, he got a call. My mother got a call saying that my father was at the calabozos. And so my mother asked for permission to go see him, and they said, no, you cannot, not yet. You have to give us time to get things settled here. And the calabozo, by the way, was near the Estado Mayor. Okay, I think that's where it was. So finally, about a week and a half later, my mother was able to go and see my father. And she said that the conditions there were just absolutely horrible. But at least she got to see him. He was relatively well, considering everything that was going on. And interestingly enough, about 3 weeks into this, an officer from the rebel army went there and said, who are these people? And they said, well, these are, as you know, they call it esbirros. They were officers. And this officer from the Revolutionary Army said, no, officers cannot be in this place. We will send them to the officers' club, detained. We will put guards around it, and then that's where officers need to be, not in conditions like this. So it's actually one of them that got the officers out of that horrible environment and sent them to the officers' club. So my dad was there. He actually had 2 chances of running away, which were given to him by one individual from my mother's family and another individual from his family. And they said, we can get you out of here. And my father said, why? I have done absolutely nothing wrong. There's absolutely no reason for me to run. I'm a career officer, and I've done what was required of me. And so a month later, or 2 months later, excuse me, they started all the mock trials as they had, and he was tried for cooperating with the government and for being instrumental to the 10th of March, a coup, and so he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. From there, he was sent to La Cabaña, and he stayed in La Cabaña for about 6 months or so, and then he was sent to the Isle of Pines, where he served the rest of his sentence. So that's the story of January 1st, 1959, and a few days after that. I was lucky. You know, the one thing I remember, and for me was very unsettling, is that literally my mother, my brother, and I, on January 1st, became homeless. That was it.
The end of your world.
That was the end of my world.
As you knew it.
As I knew it. Well, the government confiscated everything. They confiscated everything of everyone that had had anything to do with the government, whether they were in the military or in private service, you know, in the public service. So everything was literally confiscated. All bank accounts were frozen. And so on January 2nd, we literally had nothing but the clothes we were wearing. And here's where I'd like to bring back the subject of this sergeant that I was so great, Sergeant Camejo, because what he did, and he risked his life doing this, he went back to our house, and he was able to get a lot of things out of the house for us. So we were, at least clothing, we were able to get the clothing, some of the clothing that we had, and even, it was funny because he was able to bring out like my bedroom set. And I don't know how he did it. He couldn't get anything else out, but my bedroom set, he was able to. So I had something familiar, at least in my parents, in my grandparents' home, that belonged to me. So, like I said earlier, we will always be grateful to him for what he did for us. And he stood by my dad all
Loyalty.
all along. That loyalty that Roberto was talking about earlier.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. That's very deep. Your family, my godmother, which is your mother.
Yes.
Went through so much.
My parents and your parents, Hina, were very close, and as you know, they were your godparents.
Yeah.
That's how close the relationship and the friendship was.
Yes, and even though we were in the States, I remember as a little kid, especially my sister Norma, who was, you guys were like best friends, I guess.
Yes, we were.
Because she tells me that was my best friend,
Yeah.
Nina. She always used to mention you, and they always used to mention your dad, and my mother couldn't understand how her Godmother could go through so much and bear so much by
Yeah.
herself.
You know, one thing because you were asking about my life during that horrible time, and there's one person that to me became my lifeline, and I'd like to really mention that because that was my mom's mother, my grandmother. My mother, bless her soul, she was so trying to understand what had happened to her family and her husband and her world, and so she was always trying to do what was best for my dad and trying to survive. She even had to look for a job because we had no income. Luckily, my grandfather was, you know, he had a business and he was okay, but my mother felt she couldn't be asking for money to send me to school, or my brother. So she found a job. My mother was a pharmacist. She had her degree in pharmacy, so she found a job near their house in a hospital as a pharmacist. So between that and going to see my dad and really trying to try to find what was going on and try to live the best way she could throughout all of this, I felt sometimes like I needed an anchor. And that anchor became my grandmother. And so that void that I had was filled by my grandmother. And that's another person that to me just became probably the most important, at that point, in that part of my life, in that chapter or era, became the most important person in my life. That was my grandmother.
And as we breathe now, when was the decision made in your family to come to the United States? And how hard was that decision?
Okay.
I know it was a hard one.
It was very hard. The decision to come here was hard because my father was in jail. He was in the Isle of Pines. My mother, she had her work and trying to be a mother and a daughter to my grandparents. And so a number of things started happening. A lot of rumors were going on at the time. And there was a rumor that the schools were going to be taken over by the state, as they were. I believe it was like in January or February of 1961. And so that was going on. At the same time, all the curriculum for any school had to follow the government's guidelines, including, starting in the 61 to 62 school year, teaching Marxism. So I was in a private school called Lafayette School. My brother was also in a private school called Edison, Instituto Edison in La Víbora. And so with that going on, and the fear of many parents that they were going to lose control over their children because the government was taking over, as eventually did, a lot of parents started sending their children out. And that's where Operation Pedro Pan came about, where parents started, as you know, sending their children out. And 14,400 children left Cuba without their parents through this wonderful program. Well, there was another factor that was going on. I had finished Comercio, which was like secondary school, and I was getting ready to start the university. Well, the problem was at the university, you had to become to the communist youth in order to go to the university. And that was never going to happen because I was not going to do it. The other thing, my mother got very angry with me because she saw me once distributing leaflets. And I was silly enough and young, didn't think things through, that I used to have all these leaflets, counter-revolutionary leaflets, and I would hide them under my I like they would never find them there, right? If somebody came and searched the house. So my mother was afraid that I would get into trouble, and then if I was sent to jail and my dad in jail, that would have been unthinkable. So my father agreed with her that it would be best if they sent my brother and I out of the country and into the United States. So through the foundation, Pedro Pan Foundation, and my mother had some relatives here in Miami, they were able to get my brother and I the visa waivers so that we would be able to travel here even though we were minors without an adult. And so we came in October of 1961 and came to the United States. My mother was able to leave. First, they wouldn't allow her to leave for two reasons. Number one is because there was, at the time, there was a lot of, as you know, brain drain. And a lot of professionals were denied the exit because they were running out of professionals, because a lot of people in that category were leaving. So she couldn't leave. She also didn't want to leave my dad behind until my father said, no, I want you to go. But that was not until 1966. So she was able to leave. I believe they were called Freedom Flights in 1966. My dad, luckily, was able to leave in 1980. we were literally separated from my dad for 21 years. So he was able to leave in 1980. There was an agreement, I think, in between the United States and Cuba. So a lot of political prisoners left at that time, and so he was one of them. But here's a really sad story regarding his arrival here in the United States, in that as he came out of customs in the airport of Miami, we all saw him. He looked obviously a lot older, and he was skinny, and he was wearing these drab clothes and everything else, but he recognized me and my mom, and he hugged us. And my brother was literally standing next to him and hugged him, and he looked at my brother. He said, "Who are you?" He didn't recognize. Well, my brother was a little kid. Last time he had seen him, and he saw a man. And that always stayed with my brother, because it was so sad that your own father doesn't recognize you. But things just, I think so many sad things have happened to us throughout the years that one more, sometimes we don't even think about it. So that was when we came, and why we came, and how we came.
And how has been your life in the United States for you and your mom and your dad? I know that when you came, I know that you worked very hard.
My life in the U.S., well, first of all, I truly believe that I have lived the American dream. I came here with nothing. I think I had 10 pesos when I came in 1961. My first job at 18, and that was my first ever, was selling popcorn and chocolate candy at a store in Hialeah. And so that was my very first job. But somehow I always thought that if I worked hard, I would always get a better job. So after that job, then I got a job as a typist. One of the things of which I will always be very grateful, and this I owe to my mother, was she had the foresight or the vision, whichever you want to call it. When I finished 6th grade, she said, "I'm going to send you to an American school called Ruston Academy." I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because I want you to learn English." And so I remember saying to her, because I love my school and I love my friends, and I remember saying, "But we live in Cuba. I don't need to learn English." And she said, "Oh, yes, you do. Because that's going to be a language that will be very helpful to you later on in life." Boy, was she right. So when I arrived here in 1961, I had attended Ruston, and then for 3 years, and then Lafayette School for another 3 years. And so I was very, very lucky that I was able to get perhaps not great jobs, but better jobs than some of the Cubans here had to do. So as I was saying before, then I got a job as a typist. And then the next job was as a secretary. And then the other job was as a secretary in a better job. And so little by little, I always got better jobs. And so I would leave one and then go on to another. And so before I knew it, I was really, truly living the American dream, because I was able to buy my own house. And even as a divorced woman, this was later on in life, with 3 sons, I still was able to live that dream. I raised my children as Americans, but with the Cuban traditions and Cuban values. One of the things that I decided to do when I arrived here was truly embrace the American way of life and join the melting pot. Because what I did not want to do was be different. I wanted to be, since I was here, perhaps not by choice, but I was here. So I wanted to be an American and act as an American and raise my children as Americans, and that's exactly what I did. So my life here, lived the American dream. I have 3 great kids with their own families and 3 wonderful grandchildren.
And you have excellent,
Thank you.
amazing life.
Her job with Xerox.
Yeah, I was gonna go there.
Okay.
She's being very humble there. But I know for a fact, because my sister Norma was very proud of you, that from all the challenges that you went through, and being on your own here, things that you had to face. Everyone had to face something, but it's a little different when you are stripped from your parents and you have to fly in a plane by yourself, like Peter Pan's, like everyone that has said this story here today. You represented a huge corporation. Tell us a little bit about that. That's the success of the Cubans.
Yes.
I mean, Cubans may have, you could say whatever you want, but they have rebuilt their lives and they have made it better for themselves and their children. And it's amazing every day the positions that they hold as chief executive officers or directors of companies or managers of companies. It's amazing and even their children.
One of the things that I've always regretted, if we want to put it that way, is I had to come here and work. I didn't have the luxury of having parents with me that would support me, even if I did work. But I had to work. I couldn't go to school, which I always regretted because, without bragging too much, but I really was a very good student. In fact, I was a straight A student, and so I always worked very hard, as I told you earlier, to get ahead. So in 1973, I went to work for Xerox as a secretary, but I knew I could do better. And in fact, there was a position that became available in sales support that I really wanted. So what I did was, and by the way, throughout all of this, sometimes I would pick up college texts, books, and read them, so that I could learn. And so I was always reading and trying to learn from different sources. So what I really wanted this job, which was in sales support, and so I went to talk to the hiring manager, and I said, look, I know I don't have the qualifications, and I did not have a college degree, but I really want this job. What do I have to do to get it? So he said, okay, I'm going to give you a list of the things that you need to do, and he did. So I started to do all of these things that he told me I needed to do. So when the next job became available, I went to see him, and I showed him proof. Everything that he told me I needed to do, I had done. So I said, so now do I get the job? And I did. I got the job, and then that was the stepping stone. It was like a springboard to continue to work as a professional. From there, I went into sales, and then I went into management, and along with those promotions also came sacrifices, because I had to move. So I moved from Miami to Atlanta, took my children with me, and then 3 years later they said, well, we want to make you a manager in Dallas. So I packed my kids, and those were sacrifices, because when you have children, you have to think about them, not only about yourself. And so I moved to Dallas, and 5 years later they said, we want you to work. And this is where I really, where I really realized my dream. Because what happened was, they said, with all the experience that you have gained over the years, all the management experience that you have, we want you to manage sales in Latin America. So once again, I was transferred to Stamford, Connecticut, and I became a sales manager for Latin America. And then not only sales manager, but then sales operations manager. And that was the culmination of so many years of getting ready, of being able to utilize my language. I even learned Portuguese so that I could visit Brazil and do business in Brazil. So everything that I had done, I felt culminated in such a responsible position, which I thoroughly loved. I traveled in this hemisphere from Argentina all the way to Canada to Alaska. And it has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, doing business in Latin America. And when I decided to venture out, I resigned 21 years after I had started with Xerox, and I started to work for myself. And so I formed my own company and applied everything that I had gained, all my sales experience and my management experience, and I love training. So I started training sales forces throughout Latin America, and that's what I have been doing since 1994. But I'm ready to retire. As I near 70, which is next year, I will be retiring.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Great story.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Can I add something?
Right?
I want to echo something. I want to echo something that Roberto had said, and I think one of the things that as Cubans, regardless of who we are, need to do is maintain unity. I think that we're too divided in petty things, and so one of the things I am hoping for is that at some point all of us will wake up and realize that what's important is the freedom of 11 million people who don't have the capability or don't have the freedom of thought and the freedom of expression and the freedom to select who's going to govern them. And it amazes me. One of the things that amazes me and that saddens me is the total lack of caring of the world for our little island, our little beautiful island. Nobody cares. All people want to do is go visit and have a good time and drink the mojitos and go on vacation. But the misery of the Cuban people are not in people's minds. They just don't care. And maybe someday the world will care.